I just want to make a statement. So me sharing my story and my experiences with my children's fathers is not in any way to bash them or to throw dirt on them or nothing like that at all, because I'm just not bitter. I put in a lot of work. I refuse to be bitter. For me, when I had my son, life changed, and I realized that the ways in which I operated before, I couldn't continue to operate. Even though I didn't know what I was doing, I knew I had to do something different than how I was operating. The birth of my son is what started the deep inner work in me, and understanding and uncovering the daddy issues that I had and the pain that I experienced because of my dad. But again, because of the cycles and the mindsets that I had as far as being abandoned as a child, I got into a relationship that reflected that type of trauma. And so fast forward, here I am, 22, 23 years old, and I reconnected with my son's father. So my son's father, he was someone who in my early teenage years I met when I was a young teenager, and I lost my virginity to him. It was like one of those summer flings, like, you know, a summer thing. We worked at the same job, and by the end of the summer I lost my virginity. School was starting back up, and I really wasn't able to talk to boys like that anyways. And so I just knew that we wasn't going to keep in communication, and I was okay with that, because that was just the reality. Like, I knew that I couldn't bring him home as my boyfriend because I couldn't have a boyfriend at the time. So I was okay with us not communicating once the summer was over. And then years later, I'm 22, 23 years old, and me and my son's father reconnected. And it just so happened to be summertime. And it was fun. Like, it was fun. He was my best friend. Like, that was the first time I really felt like I was the only person who didn't have kids. And so once my time came, I was just excited to know I can pour my love into someone else. I can pour my love into my child. And so I didn't focus so much on the reality of my son's father, his abandonment during that time, because I was just so happy and overjoyed to be able to bring life into the world. I definitely in my alone times had my thoughts where, you know, I was sad about his absence, but I never would like ponder on that too long. When I was pregnant with my son, I never let myself get too down, honestly. Like, I never allowed myself to get too depressed because his dad wasn't around. During the time of my pregnancy, we would still communicate sometimes on the phone. Like, we wasn't really seeing each other. We went from seeing each other all summer, hanging out, just having fun, to we didn't really see each other. And we didn't talk much, but when we did talk, we never talked about the baby. We never really talked about the fact that I was having his baby. We never really talked about it. I remember telling him when I found out that I was having a boy that it was a boy. And I remember when I was about 5 months after, you know, regular pregnancy routine tests, the doctors told me there was a possibility that my son could have Down syndrome, and they gave me, you know, different options and things that I can do, different tests that I can have taken while I was pregnant, which I declined because it would put my son at a risk of me losing my baby. And so I didn't go through any of that. And I remember sharing that with him. That was the first time it really hit that I was doing this by myself, because I remember telling him, you know, that they were saying it was a possibility of my son having Down syndrome. And like, I remember it like it was yesterday. After the appointment, me and my mom had went to Applebee's. We went out to eat, and me and him ended up on the phone. And I remember standing outside in the doorway, and I was telling him, and it was just dry, you know, like he just wasn't emotionally attached to the life that was growing inside of me. And I think that was the first time that it really hit me that this hurts. Like, I'm doing this by myself, and it hurt and it didn't feel good. But even still, I didn't put too much energy into the negative side of the fact that he was absent. I knew that I was having this baby and I was gonna love him. I was gonna love him no matter what, no matter how he came out, no matter what the doctors were saying about Down syndrome and all. I just knew that I was gonna love him, and so I didn't put too much energy into his dad not being a part of the journey. Fast forward, I have my son June 1st, 2012, and it was the best day, one of the best days of my life. Like I'll never forget going into labor and having my son all natural and having my son and bringing life into this world. Like I felt invincible. Like I felt like there was nothing that I couldn't conquer. And I remember leaving the hospital and being rolled out in a wheelchair, and I cried. It rained the day that I took my son home from the hospital, and I cried because I cried for two reasons. I cried because of the joy that I felt, and then I cried for my son because, again, that was when it hit again, like I'm doing this by myself. And I think that's when the embarrassment really started to set in. When I went home with my son, I was living with my mom, but I went home with my son and his dad just wasn't there. And it was hurtful. It was once my son was born that the hurt started to set in. I was still very happy and still had all of this love and could just feel all this love that my son was giving back to me in return. But his dad's absence, I think after probably within the first couple of days of me being home from the hospital, his dad did eventually come by and he seen him. And then after that, he was absent. I really can't recall how often we talked during that time, but I know it wasn't often at all. And I don't know if we talked about the baby. Like my son was non-existent. And then I remember a particular incident where I was in the mall. My son was still fresh, a couple of weeks old. He was a couple of weeks old, and I was in the mall with my sister, and I saw my son's dad walking in the mall with his friend. And so he came over and he spoke to me, and he looked in at my son in the stroller, and then he went on about his business and I went on about my business. And for me, it took me back to an experience that I had as a little girl where, one particular time I'm walking through the mall with my sister, and who do I see? I see my dad walking through the mall with his friend. And we walked right past each other like we didn't know each other. I was a young girl, like maybe 11 or 12, somewhere around that age, but I was a young girl. And I walked past my dad like he wasn't my dad, and he walked past me like I wasn't his daughter. But inside, it hurt. Like that hurt. I always felt like I'm the child. You should come to me. You should come for me. And so fast forward all of these years later, 20 or so years later, and I'm in the same situation, but this time it's with my son. And it was another one of those moments where it hurt. It was embarrassing. It was humiliating, like to know that this is your child and here I am by myself raising our child, and you can walk past us in the mall, and halfway speak and keep on going about your business. It was very, very painful, but again, I was on cloud nine from the birth of my son that I didn't put much energy into his dad's absence. And so I went the first 11 months of my son's life not really chasing his dad down. I never chased his dad down. Let me just say that. You can't make anybody do something that they don't want to do. And so it's just unnecessary energy to attempt to try to chase somebody down to do something that they don't want to do. And so for the first 11 months after, when he came and seen him when he was first born, and after the time in the mall, he was absent. He was not around. He was not present. Around 11 months, he started to come around right before my son's first birthday. I had planned a birthday party all on my own, wanting to celebrate his first year of life. His first year of life was amazing. Like it was the best feeling in my world. Like I had a glow that I just couldn't explain. Like I loved being Makai's mom. I love being Makai's mom to this day. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to be Makai's mother. And so right before his first birthday, I was planning his first birthday, and his dad came back around as we were approaching birthday party time. That was when humiliation for me really set in, because I was now put in a position to have to ask if he was going to show up to the birthday party. And that wasn't something that I wanted to do, because I just felt like I shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to ask, but I did, for the sake of my son and me wanting him to be there. And again, humiliation. When I asked, his initial response was he didn't want to come because he hadn't been present in his life for the first 11 months, and so he wasn't sure like how everyone else who would be there would receive him. And it was frustrating, because it's like, who cares what people got to think, or people have to think about you being here. We have to show up for our children no matter what. Like pride, ego, all of that go to the side once you bring life into the world. And it was frustrating for me. It was very frustrating, but I, as a young girl, learned how to suppress my feelings. So I asked the question and said my piece, but not really go into how I felt about it. My son's birthday came and the party came, and he showed up. He did show up for his first birthday. From there, we made an attempt at trying to be a family. I loved him, and I still love him. I'll always love him. I'll always love him. We share something that I don't regret 1 second of it. And so I'll always love him. After my son turned 1, we attempted relationship and attempting to be a family. And that second year of my son's life was completely different from the first year. And it just was a traumatic experience for me. I didn't know what family should feel like. Growing up in a single parent household, I didn't know what it should feel like for a child to have a mom and a dad, and for a child to have love and support from both parents. But I just knew that wasn't it. Like I knew I loved my son, and I knew I loved his dad, but together it just didn't feel like what I knew it should feel like. It just didn't feel like the family unit of love. And so it was hard for me to walk away, because I knew, based off of my past history with him not being present until my son was 11 months, I just knew that if I left the relationship, it was a great possibility that my son would not have the type of bond and relationship that I desired for him to have with his dad. And that scared me. So I stayed longer than I should. I tried to make it work longer than what I should, because of the fact that I wanted my son to have what I didn't have. I wanted him to have his dad. But as time went on, I realized that I'm doing my son a disservice to keep him in a situation that is not mentally and emotionally healthy for me or for him. And so after months of staying and crying and trying to make it work and pouring my all out, and I remember sitting there crying and just telling him how I felt and trying to make it work. And it was like, it was falling on deaf ears. I had to make a decision to leave. And so I left with my son. And that was when, like, all of those suppressed feelings that I had from childhood, that I had through my pregnancy, abandonment, it was like, that's when my world like came crashing down on me. When I left that relationship with my son's father, life hit in a hard, dark, depressive way. And I didn't know what to do. After, not being sure what to do for a period of time, I was staying with my mom. I was staying with one of my friends at the time. Just had no clue. I had no clue in what I was doing. And on top of the fact that I didn't have any clue what I was doing, I was so hurt. I was so hurt and so broken. And so I made the decision to leave and go to Texas with my grandmother. And I say it like I made the decision because I knew how to make decisions. No, I was running. I was running from my realities. I was running from the realization that I had this child and I didn't know what I was doing. I was running from all of this suppressed feelings. Those 5 months that I was there, it was exactly what I needed. I had time to clear my head and to understand that the issues and the experience that I had with my son's father didn't just start there. It started with my own dad. And I, over time, have learned that the issues that I had with my dad didn't start with me and him. It started before then. And so I've learned and grown to heal, to understand that I had to forgive, but it didn't happen overnight. It definitely was and has been and will always be a process, because the hurt that I've experienced, it's a part of who I am. It's a part of me being here and talking and sharing my story. And so I can never get away from that hurt. I have to carry it everywhere with me. But I've made a decision to turn it into purpose. I made the decision to tell my story and not to allow my story to tell me and to run my life and to tell me how I'm going to be.